The Miami Dolphins enter the 2025 offseason with a defensive line that leaves fans with mixed feelings. On one hand, this unit was the backbone of a defense that ranked in the top 10 overall and ninth against the run. On the other, it was one of the league's worst in generating sacks. How can a group dominate in one area and disappear in another? That's the puzzle the Dolphins need to solve as they head into a critical offseason. Zach Sieler deserves all the credit in the world for the season he put together. Recording his second straight 10-sack campaign, Sieler was the anchor on the interior and a relentless force in the trenches. What's even more remarkable is how he maintained his dominance despite losing Christian Wilkins, his longtime running mate, to the Raiders in free agency. Many thought Sieler's production might take a hit without Wilkins drawing attention, but instead, he elevated his game. He didn't just meet expectations, he crushed them. However, there's an undeniable issue looming. Sieler's $9.1 million salary for 2025 is an absolute bargain when you consider his impact, and the Dolphins would be foolish not to address that. He's playing like one of the best defensive linemen in the league, and the team needs to reward him before this turns into an unnecessary distraction. Calais Campbell's arrival last offseason was nothing short of a blessing. At 38 years old, he wasn't just a contributor, he was a leader, a stabilizer, and the heart of the defensive line. Campbell's presence helped this unit exceed expectations, particularly during a stretch when the Dolphins started the season 2-6 and looked like they were spiraling out of control. Without Campbell, this defense likely wouldn't have found its footing in time to salvage the season. He brought consistency in the run game, leadership in the locker room, and enough pressure to keep opposing offenses uncomfortable. It's no exaggeration to say that Campbell was the glue holding things together. But now the question becomes whether he'll be back for another season. At this stage of his career, Campbell's focus is on winning a Super Bowl, and he might decide that his best shot lies elsewhere. If he leaves, or decides to retire, the Dolphins lose more than just a player, they lose a cornerstone of their defensive identity. For all the positives this group brought to the table, it's impossible to ignore their glaring weakness, getting after the quarterback. Ranking 27th in sacks per pass play is not just a disappointment, it's a failure. This was a defense that prided itself on toughness and physicality, yet it couldn't close the deal when it mattered most. Sieler did his part, but he didn't have enough help. Benito Jones was adequate, but not the kind of player who changes games. Deshaun Hand was serviceable, but hardly a consistent impact player. Matt Dickerson? A depth piece, at best. When your supporting cast consists of guys who can be described as adequate and serviceable, you've got a problem. And now, all four of those players are set to hit free agency. Do the Dolphins bring any of them back? Or is it time to overhaul this unit entirely? These are not easy decisions, but they're ones the Dolphins can't afford to get wrong. Free agency doesn't offer much in the way of solutions. The crop of available defensive linemen is underwhelming, to say the least. Sure, there are a few intriguing names: Osa Odigizua, Milton Williams, B.J. Hill, and D.J. Jones, but the reality is that these players will demand top dollar. The Dolphins are already dealing with cap concerns, so a bidding war for second-tier talent might not be the best use of their resources. And then there's the Campbell factor. If he decides to return, re-signing him becomes a priority. But the team can't afford to sit around waiting for him to make up his mind. They have to operate as if he's not coming back, because anything less would be irresponsible. If he does return, that's a bonus. But banking on it? That's a recipe for disaster. Thankfully, the Dolphins have the NFL draft to lean on, and this year's class of defensive linemen is stacked. The 2025 draft is loaded with talent, particularly on the defensive front. Michigan's Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, Ole Miss' Walter Nolan, Kentucky's Deone Walker, and Texas A&M's Shamar Stewart all project as first-round picks, and any one of them would be a welcome addition to this defense. These are players who can step in from day one and make an impact. And the depth doesn't stop there. Even on day two, there are plenty of intriguing options at nose tackle, defensive tackle, and 3 to 4 ends. Texas A&M's Nick Scourton and Arkansas's Landon Jackson are just two examples of players who would fit perfectly into Miami's scheme. The Dolphins have 10 picks in this draft, and they can't afford to waste them. Using at least 2 of those picks to bolster the defensive line isn't just a good idea, it's an absolute must.